Hi. So everything we hear about trauma in society might be wrong. Cool. What do we do with that? I'm Dr. Courtney Skiera-Vaughn. My work centers around cross-cultural conceptualizations of trauma. Look at this fabulous question from a social worker who works largely with immigrant and refugee populations. So what happens when what we've been trained to see with trauma or potentially traumatic situations, because remember, we can't universally blanket a situation as necessarily traumatic, right? But if what we've been taught to see and assess as trauma doesn't jive with what we're actually seeing and experiencing sitting across the table from another individual, what do we do? This is a huge issue that needs to be resolved. And unfortunately, it's going to take a lot of resources in order to actually do that. But there are amazing individuals who are working on this very concept. Because essentially what we need to do is to be able to have an assessment for each population within the world that we're looking at. But we don't have that. But what we do have is our humanity. And we can ask questions with humility and curiosity. And we can really, really listen to what those answers are. Because here's the thing, each culture already has its own understanding of healing and healing rituals, okay? They have to. And I'm going to quote here, cultural beliefs act as perpetual filters to the cognitive appraisal and interpretation of traumatic stressors. Okay. Basically, each people group has a distinct reaction to trauma, but they also have culturally specific modalities of healing. What our job is to figure out what are those culturally relevant healing modes and what is preventing that individual from assessing those and see if we can then bridge that gap. Now, one thing I would recommend is that regardless of an individual's culture, okay, Western, Eastern, individualistic, collectivist, shame, honor, guilt, innocence, power, fear, whatever that culture is to look and assess, is that individual isolated or are they withdrawn at all? But of course, there are different ways at looking at isolation too. In the US, in our very pathological way of viewing things, we often think something happens that is potentially traumatic, right? So an experience, a situation happens, which then causes trauma or stress or anxiety or depression, which then causes an individual to withdraw or to self-isolate. But there's another way of looking at it. Other places in the world look at a potentially traumatic or stressful situation occurs. So something happens, which causes an individual to withdraw or to self-isolate, which then creates the trauma response, the stress, the anxiety, or the depression. Which way it goes, we're not sure. And kind of it doesn't really matter because by assessing if an individual is isolated or withdrawn, that will give us a really good clue on if that individual is experiencing some sort of distress. I won't say universally, but in a lot of cases, withdrawnness and isolation is a big thing to look for. So I don't have an exact answer. That is a question I get often. Okay, so what do we do about that? What I would suggest for you or anybody who's watching this that does work cross-culturally or with a lot of different people within cultures who may have experienced trauma, I would suggest hiring, outsourcing, either finding a contractor or a researcher to come in and actually do the work from an emic perspective, from an insider's perspective, as to what exactly stress and trauma and healing and resiliency look like. Shameless plug and side note, I also do this, so you can let me know if you need me to do this. I do it on all different levels. So yes, it's hard, but we're not going to give up. We're going to keep carrying on, and we are going to keep caring about people by asking questions and by listening. As always, references are in the comments. Let me know if you have any questions.